Welcome to Burning the Boats.
Joshua, my man, how you doing?
All right, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah, man, good. Good to see you. Good to see you again. It's been a while since we've seen each other in person, but yeah, man. When it comes to building funnels and just business strategy, just overall being a cool person, I couldn't think of anyone else to reach out to, man. You're definitely like, when I think of the most interesting man in the world, it's no longer the Dos Equis guy. It's definitely you.
Well, that's a high bar to live up to, but man, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man, of course. So give us a little bit of a background for those who don't know you, or just give us little hints of your secret past, because man, you have such an interesting background that I definitely want to highlight that.
Sure. Well, the reason that you may or may not hear roosters in the background right now is because I'm in Key West, Florida, and there's roosters everywhere down here. Honestly, there's probably one like 10 feet away right now across that fence. And I've been here for the last 3 months, kind of riding out the COVID wave. And before that, I was on, very much like you, a quest around the United States, but I was doing it on the back of a motorcycle, and interviewing cool people along the way, documenting the journey. The way that I have my own business. I've done a lot of marketing for people, but also I have 2 softwares now. One is called Funnel Mappy, the other is called Fire Builders. And so I've been developing those over the past number of years. Before all of the online stuff, though, I was a mechanical engineering designer for guys like Disney and Universal Studios and Justin Timberlake. And we designed and built a whole bunch of stuff for them. And then before that, I was a tall ship captain. So all in my 20s, I was a professional sailor, essentially, and got my captain's license from the Coast Guard and then drove boats all over. So I learned a lot about life in those years, the sailing years. So yeah, it's been a really crazy journey so far.
What would you attribute all of that? Because for many people, it seems like risk is a big issue, right? Like, oh man, I don't know if I can do that because of X, Y, and Z. But I also know you've driven a motorbike throughout, what was it, Thailand, I believe? And
northern India,
yeah,
of the Himalayas.
Yeah. So it seems like you're very kind of like a go-getter. You're kind of like, you know what? Let's go ahead and go do these big things. Let's go live on a boat. Let's go start 2 software companies. Let's go, travel across America on a motorbike. What do you think is driving all of these decisions?
I would say like I have this just internal competition within me, like this fire about to create things. I think that it's not like inherent. It's not like I was born with it. I think it developed over time. Ever since I was a kid, I've been creating stuff, and I think little by little, every single thing that you end up creating, you start to gain a little bit more confidence in yourself and what you can do. To me, the most valuable skill as a human being that someone can have is to be able to take the ideas that they have in their head and create them and make them a reality. I think that if you do that, the doors open up to you and you can honestly achieve anything that you set yourself to achieve in life. But that process from going like, having some crazy idea to actually, articulating it and then not manifesting it, but manufacturing it into the world is a crazy journey, and it's a hard journey. And it's something that I feel like now I'm starting to just get more and more confidence with, so that I don't doubt myself at all those places along the way and stop myself from any meaningful progress, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to unpack that, because you threw 3 gold nuggets that I kind of want to pick at. And the first one is, you mentioned that you were a creator since you were, very young. Do you remember the first creation where you were like, oh, you know what, I'm a creator, I could definitely do something cool with this?
Yeah. And I've never said this out loud really to anybody, but one of the things that I used to do when I was really young, like maybe 7 or 8 years old or something, is that we would go to the mall with my mom. And at the mall, we'd go to these department stores like Macy's and stuff back then, like Neiman Marcus and all this stuff. And she'd be shopping, and I would because I'm 7 or 8 years old, I'm like close to the ground, right? So,
Yeah.
so I would walk around and explore the floor and find all of these like pieces of broken hangers and rubber bands and paper clips and stuff like that. And I would just build machines out of them, or creations in some way, like a rubber band gun or God knows what else. But I distinctly remember doing that. And I don't know what it was about it. It was just like the intersection between being creative and then understanding how things worked, and experimenting with whether or not I could recreate something from a whole bunch of different random pieces of plastic you find at the floor of JCPenney. So that I can distinctly remember as like some of the first things that I've created. And then I got a lot of help from my parents when I was also younger. I don't know who your main demographic is for this show and what age they are, but if you remember the Nintendo Game Boy, like I so wanted a Game Boy when I was little, and my dad said, yeah, we're not going to buy you one, but what you can do is we'll help you create a product. And I lived in a neighborhood at the time, and so there were these things called goldfish grabbers, basically just these like a unique way to hold the neighborhood newspaper. And I made about 150 of these with my dad, and I went around door to door and I sold them to neighbors with this, how could they say no? This like little kid, right? Sold them for $1 a piece. And I sold 100 of them and installed them all and did all that stuff and got the money to buy the Game Boy. And that was like the first like real true sort of entrepreneurial thing that I did.
I love it, man. So we went from creating, plastic guns in the bottom of department stores to then, essentially selling a product for you to buy your first Game Boy. Do you remember how you felt when you bought the Game Boy?
Yeah. It was incredibly accomplished, of course. Like, that opens up so many more possibilities in your mind. Like you say to yourself, man, if I can do this, what else can I do? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, for me, it was the Game Boy Color. And at the time, there was like a Pokemon attachment where you can play the game on the actual TV as opposed to the Game Boy. And that was like my whole thing that I really wanted to get. But then before we get too far into like Pokemon and Game Boys, one thing that you mentioned that stood out was there's a difference between manifestation and manufacturing. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a big fan of if it doesn't exist, like figure out a way to make it happen, right? I realize that that's a little bit different in a sense that when I hear of manifestation, right, I think that there's a lot of power in focusing and visualizing on what it is that you want, right? But I also think that luck, that the fact that you start to see what you're focusing on, you start to see it a lot in your life, it only kind of takes you so far. Then you have to take the next step and actually make it happen, create your own circumstances for things to kind of fall into place. And that's what I think that people like don't do enough, right? It's the universe won't provide for you. Like you got to end up making it happen. And that's why I think that I make that distinction. Just figure out a way to make it happen. And honestly, the way that I've found the easiest way, well, not easy, the simplest way that I have found to do this is to give myself like a little bit of a timeline and then cut that timeline in half, right? It forces myself to say, look, if I have to build this thing and have it done by Friday, by the end of the week, right? What kind of like compromises would I have to make with myself, right, in order to make this happen? So like, for instance, if it's, let's say that it's a minimum viable product for a new piece of software, right? Like I have this idea for an app and I need to say to myself, Josh, like, what's the fastest way I can make this by Friday? And in my head, I see the end result of the app. I see how it's like a beautiful app that people open up, and the design is the UI, the UX is like amazing, very intuitive to use. And it's doing all of these things that I want, but that's just not realistic. I by having it done by Friday, making myself do it by Friday, I have to not cut corners, but I have to make all of these compromises and forcibly prioritize what's really important and what I'll need to know, right, in order to move forward, like the bare minimum. And that's the best way that I have found to manufacture something in life, like to get it out there and show it to the world and see what kind of feedback you get after you do it.
Got it. So a couple things. Now, when it comes to that process, was that something that you learned from like a formal education, or was that kind of like a trial and error as you developed your own?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both for sure. I would say the trial and error, I think it weighs a little bit more heavily on the trial and error side of things, because you realize, like, when I first started building stuff, it was to prove to myself that I could do it. It was to just get to know myself and say, yeah, Josh, you're capable of doing this. And now that I've done it for a lot of different things, I no longer think that way. I've evolved, and now it's more of a question of, should I do it? Right? Because I understand the work that it takes. And now that kind of helps me to ask the correct questions at the very beginning. So that's the trial and error part. The formal education part really came from the mechanical engineering. I have a master's in mechanical engineering from Boston University. And you know, you go through these really intense design projects and these very hard, like, mathematical problems and stuff. But honestly, the thing that school taught me the most was learning how I learn, and also that there is no right answer. Like, I think that's a key distinction between what you learn formally, education-wise, and in real life, right? In education, like, I would go through these classes, like we took these controls classes. We're looking at like all these feedback loops and how you use math to like quadcopters and stuff, how they balance themselves out. It's all done with math. And in the back of the book, right, you do these problem sets, and in the back of the book, there's a right and a wrong answer, right? Great.
Yeah.
But in real life, there is not. And so you have to get really good at not only understanding what you do, like in my case, the math and the physics and stuff, but also justifying all of those little decisions that led you up to your final product, right? Because there's no back of the book answer to compare yourself to. You'll question whether or not you're doing the right thing at every turn. And so getting good at understanding what questions to ask, but then answering them for yourself and saying, yeah, you know, I am progressing. I am moving forward. This is moving in the right direction. I'm going to keep going. That's, I think, what like the formal education taught me.
So, I mean, that's pretty interesting, because I know for me, like when I was doing, like, number one, I suck at math. I can't do it. I couldn't do it until I figured out, like you said, I learned how I learned. And for me, I start with the solution and I have to work backwards, right? So for me, it's like I would always go to the back of the book, get the answer, and then be like, okay, how do we go from the answer to the question? And then that's how I learned. I could never figure out how to solve for X. Because for me, I was like, what does X even mean? Why is this even here? Why did we put alphabet in with numbers? I don't get it. Right. So when you're looking at I guess, solving problems, is that your approach as well? Do you start with a solution in mind? Because I know you mentioned that when you're developing a software, you think of how the app works, you visualize how it moves and how the user interacts with it. So is that the same kind of approach that you apply, or is there something else that you do with that?
No, I think it's fairly close. Definitely there's a lot of reverse engineering, right? There's also a lot of understanding the problem first. So again, for me, it's like not a question of can I do it, but should I? And to answer that, I really heavily study the problem. So there's a great, I'm sure maybe your viewers have heard the great quote. Einstein was asked, "Hey, you're given an hour, Einstein, right? What you have to solve a really hard problem. How do you allocate your time? Like, how do you solve that in an hour?" And most of it the first 55 minutes was thinking about the problem, the last 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So I do a lot of reverse engineering, but I do focus on the problem and understanding it from multiple facets, because in the process of creating the solution, you just have all of these little tiny micro decisions that show up, and each one of them branch you off into a different direction. And without having some clear understanding of what the problem actually is, you don't have a guiding light. Like there's no lighthouse that shows you a general direction. And it's easy to get lost in all of those little micro decisions, and then finally get to a point where you just like want to give up.
So when it comes to like understanding the problem, right, you mentioned that there's like multiple facets. How do you, I guess, put yourself in a position where you can think objectively about those multiple facets? Because, you know, like at the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know. So is there a method to your madness in a way where you can say, okay, here's the problem. Now, how can I think of every possible angle before I come up with a solution? Yeah,
it's a good question. It's all about research, right? That's the best. Like, you're right. You don't know what you don't know. So go find it out. Like, so there's a guy, Naveen Jain, and very interesting dude. I say dude like we're tight. Very interesting guy. He's an extremely successful entrepreneur in California, and he has found success in multiple different companies that solve incredibly large problems. We're talking understanding the human biome, solving for water crisis in Africa, like those types of problems. And the reason that he's been able to, he's not a geological engineer. He's not a doctor, like focusing on the human gut. But what he is he is constantly curious, and he's systematized the way that he finds out about a problem at the very beginning. Like, I remember, I think that I heard a podcast one time where he was talking about when he gets his mind focused and he's like, okay, this is what I want to solve. This is kind of what I want to go. I don't know anything about that. So he created all of these Twitter alerts with different experts. He went and found all of the experts in that field and put all these Twitter alerts into his phone, into his feed. And he started to learn the lingo, right? So started to learn the language of the microbiome of the gut. And then once you start getting familiar with that, you start to learn who the big players are, and you start to read their conversations, and you start to understand what the big topics are and where the big challenges are. What's cool is that I think that a lot of his success comes from the fact that he approaches the solution. Once he understands all of this, he approaches the solution from a way that most in the industry have not, right? Like the industry and in medicine, man, like everybody sort of approaches the solution in a very homogenous way, because that's where education has led them. That's where medical education has led them. But he comes at it from like a guy that doesn't have any background, and it causes him to ask questions and sort of demand answers that most in the medical community never really thought to ask in the first place. So that's what I would say to the people listening, is that if you don't know what you don't know, go find it out, go learn the language, go research, find the people that are top in that field, and kind of figure out the state of the union at first, and then how you can approach problems from a different angle.
Oh man, I love that. That's awesome. I'm gonna start setting that up. Do you do that for yourself personally? Do you set up Twitter alerts for things you don't know?
Well, I don't really use Twitter so much, but I certainly do that exact research. Like that's what I do.
Gotcha.
And so far, I mean, like I was super big into webinars way back in the day, and how I started after the app stuff. I didn't know jack about webinars, and man, I spent like 2 weeks doing nothing but spending hours a day learning about what webinars were, how they worked, what worked and what didn't, the industry leaders in webinars, how it all did. And it just accelerated my knowledge about them to then say, all right, Josh, now you know all about these webinars. Like, how are you going to contribute? How can you best help people? And it worked great.
So one thing that stood out was that there was a certain point where you wanted to do things to prove to yourself that you could do them, right? And then you kind of matured, and then you start asking yourself, should I even be doing them? Right? What happened? What caused you to switch that frame of mind?
The sheer amount of time it takes, like time and work, to just materialize one idea. You know, it's like a very learned skill. The more that you do it, the more that you realize, hey, to make that app, it took a lot more time and effort to make that happen. Problems were uncovered that I could have never thought about, and they were uncovered just in the natural process of creation. So so you do that enough times, and then you say to yourself, okay, well, there's a pattern here. I need to start thinking a little bit deeper into, should I be doing this, and not just can I? I've already satisfied it. I can do it.
Yeah.
But it's now a question of, is this the best use of my time?
So is there like a checklist or certain things that come to mind when you're like, should I do this? You know, check. Yes, I should do this.
Sort of. It's to me, it's an intersection between something that I love to do, something that I'm naturally good at, something that the world needs, and something that will make me money, right? So so that's a big part of it. Those intersections of those couple of things. Do I get a lot of fulfillment out of it? That's another question. Like, I'm currently doing this software that helps coaches scale accountability, personal accountability every day. And when I created the minimum viable products for these, and I needed to test the content and the delivery of this whole thing, I would open up the laptop in the morning, and I would see all of the people that were participating in my accountability program, right? And all of the stuff that they were doing on a daily basis. And it was all in a spreadsheet. It was all like dynamically populated, and it would just populate in this. But I would open that up in the morning, and I would feel such a gratitude and a fulfillment, because something that I built is helping people achieve their goals. That I had really never gotten. I didn't get that from any of the mobile apps that I made. It was a completely new and amazing feeling from a creation, and something that I don't know, there's just a cool feeling when you take something from your head and you put it out, you create it, and now people are using it, and using it to help themselves. And you can see that, like you can see it. There was nothing like it. So that's kind of now I'm like spoiled, because that's like the bar that I hold all of my projects against now, is that level of fulfillment.
I love it, man. Cause like, you can honestly tell from just the way you're explaining it that that's really kind of what drives you. Like, you got so hyped just talking about how you opened up that spreadsheet, and then just everybody was just knocking out their goals. And I mean, that's really cool. And I think a lot of people, want to have that feeling too, where they want to create something, right, that it's helpful to many other people and that can positively impact their lives. But there's a lot of people that get stuck in kind of consumption mode, where, for example, you were consuming all about webinars, right? Like, what is a webinar? How does it work? The process, the how does it transition? Everything about a webinar. And what would you say to someone that is kind of still consuming but still hasn't taken action? Like, what do you think is the driving factor for them to take the next step?
Yeah, you're right. Like, it's very easy to just consume, and then never take any action. You almost feel like the dopamine rush that you get from all of your consumption is just enough to satisfy you. And you don't, like, why go out and actually do it when I can just fake it and just consume, and it makes me feel like I'm doing it, but I'm not really doing it. Yeah, I would say there has to be a point where you really do have to take action. My favorite quote is by this French sailor, Bernard Moitessier. And he said, it's the work that teaches you the work. So you can consume all you want, but the real progress, the real learning happens when you apply. And so I would say that if you're stuck in consumption mode, and you're afraid that what you are going to produce in the world, what you want to do in your head, in reality will just be an embarrassment to you. It will be something that brings you shame, because people are going to see through you. People are going to that are going to put that thing down, and all of this time that you have spent is wasted. If you feel that way, I would say start small, right? Just build up your confidence slowly. So whatever that is, maybe take one small action step a day, right? Just honestly, there's something that my buddy Chris Winfield said just recently. It's not about learning, and then going 100% in from a mental point of view, right? Because that puts so much pressure on you that it's hard to live up to that on a consistent basis. But like even what your show, like Burn the Boats, to me, burning the boats is knowing what you want and doing it 51%, right? Because it's just a little bit more than the fear that you feel about failing, right? And if you can do that, you'll find that you really are burning the boats. Like you are moving forward. And that fear dissipates. It just does. The more that you do it, it's like talking to girls when you're a teenager, right? You get super embarrassed, right? You're afraid you're going to get shut down. The more that you do it, the better you get at it. The more confidence you build, the more attractive you look to. So it's like, it's that slow building of confidence that really people should strive for.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're flexing your U muscle, right? Where it's kind of like, it's all theory. It's all kind of in your head up until the moment you start to take action. And then you realize that you were freaking out about certain things that you shouldn't really be freaking out, and then weren't even considering other things that you're like, oh, wow, I had no idea, right? I'm pretty sure that when you decided to take your bike across like northern India, that kind of happened. That similar thought process was happening. Right?
Oh yeah. Oh hell yeah. Like you read magazine articles about people that do that, and you're like, oh, I could do that. And then, but once you get into the moment, and things go wrong, and the bike breaks down, and we had a massive snowstorm that avalanched us in for 2 weeks in this tiny little town called Kaza. Like stuff like that just happens. Doesn't matter how hard you prepare. Doesn't matter how much research you do. The confidence and understanding that you can be self-reliant, like you can adapt in the moment. That's a learned skill. So that's something that you're right. Like I would encourage everybody to sort of flex that U muscle and get a little bit better and better every day.
Yeah. And so like talking about, that quick problem solving, right? Because, there's always that unexpected, avalanche that might come out of nowhere. How do you handle that? Like when you are working on a project, or even when you're taking, maybe you're taking a trip on your boat and there's something that happens all of a sudden, how do you handle that process?
Well, I would say first, you don't panic. And I think that comes just from experience. Like the more that you do it, the more you realize that you're going to get through this. You're going to live through it. It's going to be okay. But then how I do it is I step back. You like, what do they say? Like be part of the solution and not the problem. So you just focus on what is the solution that I want to get here? This threw a wrench in the works. What is it that I'm trying to do? And it kind of like forces you to prioritize again on what you're doing, right? And the actions. And what am I going to need to shift? And again, that's like that's for those that are listening and you're wondering, well, I could never, I don't know what I'd do if I got into an avalanche situation, or we were on like I was saying about the sailing stuff. The ocean is an incredibly great teacher of this, because it's always dynamic. It's always changing. It doesn't care whether or not you love it or you hate it, or you're crying because you think you're going to die and sink, or, it's a beautiful day. It doesn't matter. Like, it's just going to happen, and you accept that, and you learn to take those situations just as they come, as naturally as the weather. There's nothing that you can do about it. You just work through it. You work the problem. Don't panic. Work the problem. Like, figure out what you're trying to do and work through it. Don't worry about being right or wrong at this point. Like, it's interesting. I mean, all of my experience comes from like the sailing stuff, and and even in the Northern India thing, like that avalanche, it's not like when you're in the moment, you don't really think about too much other than, hey, what am I going to have to do to fix this, right? Or in the case, like, what are we going to have to do to get out of this little town? Let's make some plans to do it and be prepared. On the ships, when the storm is raging and you're up on deck for like 12 hours at a time, you've got no sleep and you're soaking wet and you got to climb up aloft and do some sail changes and stuff like that kind of thing. You don't really think about it. You just do it, right? It's just something, you just do it. And you just do something, you take some kind of action. It's only when, we're on podcasts like this, where I can in retrospect say, oh yeah, I came up with this solution and that solution. And I was thinking about, like, you don't really do that. It's just when you're in the moment, just act, just try to act. That's what I would say to people when things like that go wrong. Just try to act and do something, and that'll kickstart a chain of events that will hopefully solve the problem.
Because it's kind of like you enter into a state of flow, right? It's kind of like, as soon as the problem happens, you're no longer thinking about all the different scenarios. You're just like, your mind just turns into like a supercomputer and starts processing everything as a priority basis, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's like an incredible filter that happens. And so only the bare minimum is necessary to get things done. And then you're just always taking feedback. You're taking feedback about your solution and trying to adapt. So yeah, that's what I would say is that I think where people get paralyzed when problems like that arise is that they feel some type of shame or embarrassment that people are going to find out about it and they're going to look stupid. And you just have to know that no one cares. Like, honestly, nobody cares about what you do or don't do. People will remember the great things that you do, and they're going to forget about the times where you failed. Right. So yeah, that's what I would say is, like, try and do your best to push that aside. No one's gonna remember it. Just act.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't seem like if I were to ask you how many times have you failed, you might have an entire list. But I feel like you would probably say I have a bunch of lessons that I've learned throughout the years. Is that still the case? And are you still continuing to learn lessons, or do you feel like you're at a point where you're like, I'm pretty on top of everything right now?
No, I'm definitely not at that point. I feel like I'm winging it all the time, but in a good way. And I definitely do have lessons that I've learned, for sure. Most of which are lessons about myself, like self-awareness, how I handle things. Like we were talking about the engineering thing, learning how you learn. Like little lessons like that have helped me now make better decisions in the present. And I also just I have had a lot of things that just haven't worked out as well as I thought they would, that I invested a lot of time and energy in. And I don't look at any of those as failures so much as I do. I look at what I learned from those and what I got out of it, the skill sets that I acquired because I went through and actually put it out there in the world. I think that it's great to be self-aware. It's great to know what you can do, but it's also a great thing to not feel numb, but desensitize yourself in a way to criticism from the world. Because that's really the big thing. You build all of this stuff, you learn how to do it, you learn how to make a podcast, or you learn how to build an app, but that's really only the first part.
Yeah.
The next part is, how is the world going to react? Am I giving them something that they want? And if it's not, how am I going to adapt to change? And like artists say, like, kill your darlings.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned, is to not take myself so seriously.
And so when you, I guess, do learn a lesson, or when you do have a setback, do you have a way of having like a positive feedback loop, right? Like, let's say, I don't know, maybe even when you were sailing, you got caught in a storm and it's your first time having to change the sail. And then after, I'm not sure if your team had like a brief in terms of what happened, what could have we done better? Do you do that for yourself personally, or even with the business projects that you continue to have?
Yeah, I do. I feel like I'm in a constant state of doing that, like at every milestone. Um, but yeah, like we got into this really bad accident about 80 miles off the coast of France. I was on a boat called the Pride of Baltimore too, and we completely dismasted the boat. It was a 150-foot, huge, like two-masted wooden schooner, and the both masts just like the rigging failed essentially, and both masts broke and crashed down to deck. There were about 16 people on board. It was like one of the worst accidents that in the tall ship community in very, in recent memory.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I remember, because we just motored back to France and we spent months in France and we were rebuilding the boat. But the most important thing that happened there was the captain brought us all in and we talked about this. He's like, this is where the learning lies, right? What did we do? What could we have done better, right? Let's retrospect what happened, the decisions that we made, why we made them, and what we can learn from it. And we did. And so just that type of like debriefing yourself is applicable everywhere, I think, not just tall ship accidents, but in anything that you do. Why didn't the mobile app that I created, why didn't it take off the way that I thought that it was going to? Well, what did I do to get the word out there? At the time, I knew jack shit about marketing, like nothing at all. And so it occurs to you that, yeah, I can build these apps and it takes a lot of work and sometimes it's very expensive. But if I don't have a good marketing plan, if I don't understand that it's a combination between what I want to build and what the market wants to use, then it might not be worth your time. So yeah, so I would say I'm always in a constant state of doing that. But when you go through big disappointments like that, you can't help but look at your decisions and say, what could I have done better?
Gotcha. How important do you think all of that, retrospecting is to, for example, accountability? Because I know, accountability in the Fire Builders app is something that you're really passionate about. And so I'm curious to know how much of it do you feel plays a role in making sure people can reach their objectives?
Oh, a huge part. Like, and not just for the negative stuff that happens, but for the positive stuff that happens. Like that's where I think the bigger benefit is we do so many, we tend to focus on the things that we don't do in, let's just say, in the week, but we tend to forget all of the great things that we do that are positive, and how much progress we're actually making. And the way that I've, like, my method with developing the Fire Builders thing is not just a structured way to keep goals and stuff top of mind, but also to remind you of all of those things that you have accomplished and make you feel good about them, make you feel like you've actually moved the ball forward a little bit. I think that's huge. And so I would say that's a process of that retrospecting, but doing it in a positive way.
Love it. So do you have like an ethos that you can go ahead and recommend to every listener, who's an entrepreneur, someone who's getting started, someone who's trying to get to that next level in their business, who's, coming up with projects and just wondering, how can I accomplish all of this? Like, do you have something for them that is going to get them motivated? And it's just like, okay, you know what, I got to get this done, and, feel good about it too.
Yeah. Well, I would say first and foremost, honestly, the people that last in this industry, the people that really make a difference in people's lives, are the ones that treat this as a marathon and not some type of sprint. It's very easy to compare yourself to folks on Facebook and Instagram and stuff and say, oh, well, why don't I have that? It seems like they're just effortlessly getting success, and here I am struggling. What is the matter with me? And that's unfair to everyone, including yourself. Treat this as a marathon. It's going to take a little while to make it happen, to build the root system under the ground so that it can support your inevitable success. But the folks that, you'll also find what you're made out of. right? So by doing that, you're going to find your own inner worth and determine for yourself whether or not this is right for you. It could very well be that you're not an entrepreneur. You like the idea of being one, but the thought of investing for the next 5 years into yourself and building something that's really difficult and fraught with disappointment, and you feel like you're swimming against the stream all the time. If that's not for you, then okay, like you better get to know that now. Otherwise it's a shame to wake up 5 years from now having done all of this and then say, you know what, like I just can't take this anymore. This never really was me. Yeah. I just want to go get, a job, which there's nothing wrong with that at all. But that's what I would say to people is that this play the long game, right? And you're going to find that you'll find way more success with that.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where, like you said, you can't compare your step 1 with someone else's step 200, like it's just a matter of staying in your lane, and just going through the process, going through the motions and going through your own journey, because everyone has their story, even though, let's say you and me have done webinars, the way we got there, very completely different stories. And it's just one of those things where you just got to take action to stop comparing yourself. And that's one of the biggest, I feel, roadblocks that many people have is just that, comparing myself to someone else or to someone that they see. And they're just like, how come that isn't happening to me yet?
Yeah, exactly. They got to put the blinders on. Like if I were to ever teach a course on this or I don't know, a class or whatever, I would forbid people from going on to Facebook and Instagram. Like I would just, honestly, we would all get on the ship and we would do all of this creation stuff at sea so that you cannot compare yourself, because what matters is what you create, there is no right or wrong, just like there's no answer in the back of the book. Like what matters is that whatever you're doing, you do it 100%, 150%, like invest in what's directly in front of you and stop, put the blinders on, stop looking at everybody else.
Yeah. Josh, man, that's a cool idea, man. We might have to do that down the road. Just get on a boat for like a weekend retreat and just smash out some goals, man.
Yeah. I think that would be great. There's so much overlap between what you learn sailing out at sea, especially on these big tall ships and stuff, with entrepreneurial endeavors and building businesses and stuff. There's so much overlap. It's incredible. So
yeah, I think it's just, life in general has a lot with being an entrepreneur, because even I'll tell you what, like building a van from scratch, you learn a lot. Like the difference between hammering a nail one way or another lets you know whether you're going to be on that project for, an hour and a half or, 5 minutes. So it's just, I mean, you're just like there's so much that you don't know, but it all relates. And I think that's just what I love about entrepreneurialism is that it's so much like life, where it's, you can either understand that it's a process, it's going to hurt and it's not going to be easy. But if you continue to strive through, and like you said, implement some of that feedback, you're going to get to a point where you feel pretty successful about yourself. And at least for me, I don't know about you, but I always feel happiest when I overcome a strong challenge. Not when something's easy and handed it to me, but when I overcome something that I thought was impossible. And then I'm like, you know what? I did it. Bam.
Yeah. You feel proud. You feel proud of yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, bud. Where can people find you? How can they get a hold of you? What do you got coming up?
What do we got coming up? Well, the big project now is Fire Builders. It's a software. You can find it at firebuilders.io. And it just helps coaches and consultants that have a lot of people that they want to hold personally accountable every day, but just can't because it takes too much time. This is a way for them to do it. It's a scalable way to hold everybody accountable and to get that positive feedback loop from people and see them actually applying the stuff that you're teaching. It's an incredible feeling. So that's called Fire Builders. I'm also hosting a show called Fire Builders Live, which is great. So tune in. It's on my Facebook page. You can find me on Facebook at Joshua Koerpel, Koerpel with a K. And then, the software that really started it all was Funnel Mappy. And Funnel Mappy is funnelmappy.com. And it's just a way that you can visualize your customers' journeys and keep all of the strategic details in one spot. So that was the very first subscription software that I built that kind of started it all. And people are using that all the time, every day. So yeah, that's I would say that's the best. Also, Saltwater CEO on Instagram. You can find me there too.
You go. Yeah, no, I love funnel mapping because I like colors, I like visualization, and so for me, like I was using a tool called Lucid Chart before, but then funnel mapping came into my life, and I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, thanks,
It's
man.
awesome,
And it's
man. Yeah.
and what's so great about it is that it keeps things simple. That's what I like about it. Is
Yeah,
like it
really
doesn't
does.
have the it doesn't have the analytics and the oh well, if I tweak this, then my conversion rate needs to be this, and to me
Yeah.
those are all distractions from actually just getting the thing built and putting it out there for people to use and see. And that's what funnel mapping I think does the best.
Now, before we end, can you talk real quick about the name Fire Builders? Because I feel like there's a very a nice story behind the naming of that and how that came to be.
Well, the whole thing was about when you're out, when you're out in the woods, this, building a fire out there, you start with kindling, you start with really small shavings of wood and stuff like that. And then you throw bigger and larger pieces of wood on there to grow the fire. And that's just a great analogy for hitting your goals. Like, start small, build up that confidence, and then pretty soon it's going to be a raging bonfire, but that doesn't start immediately. You have to build it up. And to be honest, this Fire Builder software I originally built for my mom because she's an author and she was having an incredibly hard time with writer's block. And I built this whole program for her to help her through that and to keep her motivated and inspired from her son. And then it just, the whole idea grew from there, and people wanted to white label the whole system, and now they can. But yeah, it was all about starting with little small pieces of wood and going until you got a massive bonfire going.
I love it, man. Josh, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate you, your story, and all the wisdom and insight you've given us. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for everybody that's listening. This has been awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to another awesome episode of Burning Boats. See you all next week. Bye-bye.
See ya.